Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is, Hippocrates, give me a fever and I can cure your patient. Okay. And Dell understands this too. He understands that children that get TB and run a high fever have much less infectious disease later in life. And they don't really call it infectious disease, they just call it disease. And there's good studies that show you run a fever, not from TB, but anything when you're really young, an uncontrolled fever, one that your body regulates, not that you try to down-regulate with these NSAIDs and other anti-inflammatories, that long-term, if we follow them prospectively, they do much better. So the reason why I have this book up there is anybody who wants to look at this book that Dr. Carter and I wrote for Jonathan Landsman's cancer docuseries, I'm happy to provide it to anybody on this webinar. But in the section that we wrote about doctors that are doing special things in cancer, I talk about Dr. Cliff Fetters up at Health and Wellness at Carmel. Now you have to have a pretty good bank account to use Dr. Fetters' services, but he does a number of different modalities, including one that I've worked on a lot, and I actually have a substance, I won't get too much into it, but a substance that he uses in special cases called SPDT. And I've talked about that in the past, but maybe I'll do a webinar on that. But I go over Dr. Fetters' protocol in fairly good detail because he wrote it up for me and put it in the book. But one of the modalities that Dr. Fetters uses is hyperthermia, high temperature. Okay. And so basically you're using artificial means to induce the same kind of physiological process that happens when you have a fever. And what I did this morning, I delved into it to see if there are components of artificial induction of the fever versus an actual fever. And there are slight differences. They're not hugely different. So you can simulate a fever. And the interesting thing is a fever is general, but according to Charles Mayo, infection, which we're going after, can often be focal or localized. So there are ways to do focal or localized hyperthermia. And as you'll see as I go through this presentation, that the main use of hyperthermia is in cancer therapy. And so are they killing the tumor? Maybe. But I think they're killing the antecedents of that, viruses, things, other things that stimulate this aberrant cell division. Okay, so that's a really important thing. And so what is fever? Well, before I break into that, I want to give an update on Dr. Pollack's work. And so, a lot of questions came up about the Beamer, other devices, and Dr. Pollack did an excellent job basically explaining what Paracelsus taught us: the dose makes the poison, the dose makes the cure. And the Beamer is 1 Gauss. The magnetic field from the Earth is 0.7 Gauss. The system I bought is 3 Gauss. But Pollack is talking about 200 Gauss or 2000 Gauss. So someone I'm working very closely with had an accident 10 years ago that has severely impacted her quality of life. And so we got her the A9 micropulse $500 system and have she's been on the therapy with that device for 8 or 9 days. Michelle, are you out there? Let me make sure that we've got
here.
Okay, you came in a little like a bad connection.
Can you hear me now?
Perfectly.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So I was rear-ended at high speed by a texter about August of 2013. I went from very active to very inactive in the matter of a couple of seconds. I had 3 bulging discs, C3, 4, and 5. And it tremendously threw a wrench in my lifestyle where I had a very hard time doing anything that I need to do on a daily basis, taking care of horses and running my ranch. And all the doctors wanted to do for me is the neurologist sent me to the pain doctor. They wanted to inject me with steroids in between discs and joints. And they wanted to put me on muscle relaxers and pain meds. And when I asked, what kind of therapy could I do to heal this stuff, I got nothing. So I went off on my own. I did some PRP injections, which tremendously helped the soft tissue damage, but the nerve pain never went away. It subsided a little bit, but if I do anything active, I end up down and out for 1 to 3 days. I can't move. It's hard to walk. The impact of my walk hurts. I suffer with a migraine from C3 in the base of my skull, and C4 and 5 can shoot out into my traps and my back right shoulder blade and completely incapacitate me from doing any of my daily chores. And so I've been using the device now for about 8 or 9 days, as Dr. Lewis explained, and I have noticed a tremendous difference. I re-injured it about 5 weeks ago working on my barn and could not get them to relax and calm down. And this device has done so. I'm able to sleep without pain. I don't have all the shooting pains I was having in the shoulder blade and the traps. And later this week, I will be exerting myself because I've taken it the last 5 weeks, but I will be exerting myself in the next few days, doing some things that typically aggravate it pretty badly. When I sand lumber or run my sawmill, I usually lift pretty heavy stuff and aggravate it. So we will see a good test here in the next few days, but I am really happy with this machine. It's made a huge difference so far in this little bit of time. So I'm also looking at upgrading to a bigger unit. And
Michelle, explain how convenient it is to use. It's not like a typical PEMF bed and how you apply it.
yeah, I put it on the area of my neck that's injured with an ACE bandage, and with the 9-volt battery, I'm able to walk around and do things. The batteries don't last really long. I might get maybe 6 hours out of one 9-volt battery, but I'm looking at buying some rechargeable batteries and see how that does. And then if I'm going to be stationary, I plug it into the wall. I'm going to try to sleep with it. I tried to sleep with it last night, but I'm a really light sleeper, and the little ticking sound was kind of ricocheting off my pillow without the ACE bandage wrapped around it. So tonight I'll try sleeping with it with the ACE bandage on it and see if I'm able to fall asleep.
Yeah, thank you very much for that testimonial. So literally, the device is the size of an old page or smaller than a cell phone. You can strap it on your belt or put it someplace and, get 9-volt battery chargers, and you can run it, or just run it at home when you're at, whatever you might be doing that's quiescent, but it's not inconvenient whatsoever. So it's almost no different than having your phone and earbuds and listening to music or whatever. I mean, but it's just, wherever the injury is. So we don't know for sure, but obviously she's moved substantially down the health disease continuum. And that is, the Faraday effect. We believe that the magnetic field can penetrate deeply. There's not a lot of interference to penetration. The reason why you need this is a 200 Gauss unit, $500 plus or minus. So it's 200 times stronger than the Beamer. And so you get a depth of penetration, which you don't get with the Beamer, and it's providing electrons, and electrons heal. So that's what we think is going on with Michelle. And it's really quite, I had no idea what to expect, but I have another individual that I'm going to convince to do the same thing with the exact same kind of whiplash injury. So a very important testimony. I really appreciate that.
All you ladies, if you wear a sports bra, you can stick the little device in there, and that's where I put it. You boys are welcome to wear one too and stick it in there.
TMI, Michelle. That's okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, all good. So thank you. Anything else to add, or? Nope, she's on mute again. So that's good. So let's get on onto this. So, there's a couple different things going on here. Electrons heal, there's no question about it. And the deeper we can get it and the higher the flux, the more healing we can affect. And even the literature on that device says, 6 hours a day and sleep on it overnight, something of that nature. So we'll have Michelle come back and give you updates as we progress on this. It's not the only treatment she needs, for sure. You got to fix the drain, as Dr. Carter talks about, how full is your bucket, and so that's in process as well. But so I'm kind of read this, since I'm not. I want to make sure I go down the right path with this and stay on task. But fever is a natural immune response to life-threatening infections. Blocking fever may be harmful. And I'll show you data. I think a lot of you folks would recognize that. But even in athletics, you give NSAIDs to reduce inflammation, and you don't recover as quickly, and you don't get as much benefit from exercise. And that's nothing compared to, say, an infectious disease process that's stealing your electrons, making you diseased, but stealing your electrons is really what it's all about. So fever works by causing more damage to pathogens and infected cells than it does to healthy cells in the body. And I did a great deal of thinking about this, and I'm going to explain why you can do hyperthermia and not ultimately damage your tissue. So many potential pathogens can survive, Dr. Harshfield, and function over a wide range of temperatures, but generally they like cooler temperatures, not higher temperatures. Most pathogens do not survive at elevated temperatures, and for some reason, Judy God made pathogens somewhat less resilient to a slight elevation in temperature compared to normal. So temperatures that are slightly higher than optimal can damage proteins, including enzyme function, membranes, DNA, in both hosts, us, and pathogens. Okay. Away fever may provide more benefit than harm. This is my writing now. A lot of what I have in this document is from the research literature. Has to do with recovery and rebuilding of damaged tissue. Our body is constantly in a state of repair. I tell the story about everybody should look in the toilet. Michelle is talking about putting things down her sports bra, so I'm talking about looking in the toilet and looking at that nice brown poop. It's mainly brown because we shed all our red blood cells constantly, but over a 4-month period, we completely replace them. We have great repair mechanisms. And the reason why it's brown is because your kidneys recycle the iron. So a nice red blood cell that no longer has iron is a brown blood cell. So pathogens do not have this type of repair or proliferation potential in the body. They rely on replication. If there is no hidden source of the infection, like in a root canal where it may be very hard to get to and eradicate the pathogen, they can hang out like a hobo, then obviously they can continue to replicate. But otherwise, our body is not necessarily providing them with the means to repair and recover like our tissue does. So yes, virus, SARS, cytokine storm, collateral damage, okay? But you need that. There's always going to be a little collateral damage, but we can repair ours, whereas fever proves that we create less damage to our tissue and significant damage to the pathogens that caused it. So I think the concept of hyperthermia and healthy cells is a non-starter within certain ranges of how high we go in hyperthermia. Okay, let's see. So where they can hide in the body. Let's see. Root canals are an example. They can hide. So we have to take care of places where they can hide, where we want to get rid of the source. But once the source is gone and we're just dealing with systemic or focal pathogens, then we have a good chance of using hyperthermia to get rid of them. Also, our tissue does not signal an attack response from our immune system, but pathogens do. And what happens in hyperthermia, we actually heighten the immune response. So once again, it's a biphasic. It's not just the temperature. It's the acceleration or enhancement of immune response. There's a couple things I'll explain on that. If our tissue is damaged or destroyed by fever, hypothermia, it will be repaired. So this is sort of the high-level summary. If a pathogen is present, fever or hypothermia will reduce its population. Immunity will also reduce its population. Pathogens tend to be more susceptible to fever and hypothermia. If a pathogen burden is sufficiently reduced, then the immune system can control or eliminate it. You know what Dr. Ewald in his book Plague Time says, they're already there, and we all have burdens. So it's just the balance between immunity. If our immune system's up here, we can have pathogens, and we can control them. So for example, what Dr. Webley talked about last week in terms of chlamydia pneumoniae. When we test for chlamydia pneumoniae, we're looking at multiple dilutions of the blood to determine whether you're positive. But if they didn't do multiple dilutions, and every one of us listening today just gave a raw blood sample and said, tell me if there are chlamydial antibodies in there, most of us would be positive. But it's only the ones that after multiple dilutions, AKA higher concentration, have a potential response to it. So we do not have to completely eliminate something to be free of the disease or disease caused by it, as long as we have the immune capacity to manage that that pathogen, which we do. Innate, adaptive, tertiary immunity, all that good stuff. So let's see. So according to Scientific American, fever is an elevated temperature of the body that substantially goes beyond the normal range. And that's plus or minus 98.6. It's really plus or minus, probably a little bit lower. Less likely plus. I mean, night sweats where your temperature might be a little bit elevated at nighttime, not a good thing. That's why we asked the question on our survey. Night sweats, just from a slight elevation in body temperature, when your temperature should actually go down at nighttime, implies that your body is fighting some type of low-grade infection. And TB is the classic reason for a night sweat. Lyme disease is there. I've seen it, night sweats in people with root canals, chlamydia pneumonia, things like that. Very seldom does someone report night sweats that's not, premenopausal, that doesn't have some type of infection going on. So let's see what we have to say. Normal body temperature fluctuates. Lower body temperatures occur before dawn. Higher temperatures occur in the afternoon. That's why if you have night sweats, you're probably a degree, maybe 2 degrees higher than you should be at that time, because your body's fighting something. And it's going to affect quality of sleep as well. The hypothalamus, this is what the literature says, and I had to go to a couple different sources to get to the truth, but the hypothalamus, which sits at the base of the brain, acts as the body's thermostat. It does and it doesn't. It definitely is a controlling factor, but it's not the whole story. And hopefully everybody knows what the controlling story is, but we'll get to that. You've seen the chart before. It's triggered by floating biochemical substance called pyrogens, which flow from sites where immunity has identified potential trouble to the hypothalamus via the bloodstream. So it's the typical signaling process. Some pyrogens are produced in body tissue. Many pathogens also produce pyrogens, and that's why our hypothalamus has some sensitivity towards them to then elicit a fever response. While the hypothalamus detects them, it tells the body to generate and retain more heat. I'm not sure about retaining, because if you sweat when you have a fever, you're not retaining heat, but you're generating heat for sure, thus producing a fever. Children typically get higher and quicker fevers, reflecting the pyrogen's effect on what they call an inexperienced immune system. So, obviously there's children have a stronger innate immune system, but they have a weaker adaptive immune system. And adaptive is going after the sort of the specific pathogens. So here's my comment. However, this temperature regulation is not what causes our internal temperature to be normal, what makes it 98.6. And we talked about that maybe in Energy Medicine 1 or 2, probably 1, I can't remember. Our basic physiological reactions are what set our internal temperature. The hypothalamus works to regulate our normal elevated above ambient temperature. Sweat is most likely the regulatory system initiated by the hypothalamus. And then the New England Journal of Medicine, which we used to trust is the #1 medical journal, but now we're a little suspicious because according to Arnold Relman, 15-year editor-in-chief says it's he didn't have control over it anymore. Money did. But thermoregulation of body temperature is a balance between heat production and heat dissipation. Andrew, are you out there? What kind of reaction produces heat and what kind of reaction dissipates heat? You don't have to answer, Andrew. It's okay, even if you're not on. Electron recycler. So we talked about this in great detail before, and that is heat is generated internally by a byproduct of all metabolic processes. Not true. Okay, New England Journal of Medicine. Some suck up heat. This refers to the endothermic and exothermic reactions ongoing in our body all the time. Endothermic reactions suck up heat, cool you down. Exothermic reactions release heat, heat you up. And the reason why we're at 98.6, not room temperature like a cold-blooded animal, whatever, and we don't need a cooling system like your car engine, is because we have a balance between these endothermic. This reaction will still go, but it requires energy input into it, and we have that happen all the time. Like glutathione. Glutathione donates an electron, okay, to get it back to the reduced state so it can donate it again, so it becomes oxidized. To reduce it, it requires an input of energy. So it's a reaction that looks like this. We have to push energy into the system. But most of our reactions are exothermic. In other words, they release energy. So this one going from here to there releases this much energy. And that energy warms us up. That's why we're above ambient. We're not cold-blooded. Fauci is. Gates basically is cryogenic, but we won't go into that. Did anybody get that joke? Cryogenic, whatever. So from Scientific American, fever can help us fight infection, but sometimes it can climb too high for the body's own good. You know, the dose makes the poison, and the same is true of your internal temperature. The higher the temperature, the higher the dose, and if it's gonna have collateral damage, it'll have more. For instance, internal body temperature in excess of 105 expose proteins and body fats to direct temperature stressors. This form of heat distress can threaten the integrity and function of proteins accustomed to the body's usual temperature. It's all about adaptation. We don't go high that often, you know, so it's an abnormal event. We probably don't have all the mechanisms we want to manage that. Cellular stress, infarction, necrosis, all of this. Let's see. So the receptor environment of the hypothalamus creates limitations on high fever, mostly through affecting more perspiration, night sweats, fever, you start sweating. And then you have a compensatory mechanism, you feel chills, you know, so your skin is cooling. But what's happening is the reason why you feel chills is you create a lot more blood flow to the area that's infected and away from tissue like the skin that is relying on that blood flow to keep that temperature, a large surface area, regulated. Okay, so let's see what we have next. Fever never occurs in isolation from other immune responses. You know, you're going to have a cytokine or immune response to that. In this case, it's symbiotic. Higher temperatures speed up reactions. We talked about that. You know, drink a warm beverage with your meal. Digestion will go faster. That's what healthy cultures do. One type of reaction appears to be the production and action of acute phase reactants. So these are cytokines, C-reactive protein, interleukins, IL-6, TNF-alpha, all these different things. They're part of innate immunity. Therefore, fever provides two necessary benefits. Higher temperatures are hostile to the survival of pathogens. Higher temperatures speed up our internal physiological reactions, including those associated with immunity. And I need to put a third one in here, and I have it somewhere down below, but I'll put in as I move my cord away. So higher temperatures, oh dear. reduce blood viscosity and provide more blood flow. So that's another important manifestation of having a fever, get more blood flow. So what I want to focus on is, oh, the story I didn't see, there we go. I didn't tell my stories. Good thing I wrote them down. So when I was presenting in Switzerland many years ago at a small group of Alzheimer's experts from the infection space around the world, we did a public presentation, and this German guy who was in attendance, he wasn't a presenter, came up to me and he said, really the only thing you need to do is hypothermia. It's kind of a broad statement, and I brushed it off saying it's too generalized, but people do. Dr. Fetter's partners have been doing hypothermia, they're chiropractors, for a long, long time. The other thing is, and I mentioned this before, is that when I was presenting to a group of optometrists, this MD, PhD ophthalmologist was showing these little teeny nasty mites on the eyelids with videography, and showing that when he pulsed red light, and most likely near infrared light on these little suckers, they curled up and died. So the question is, was it the red light or near infrared light, which was part of the spectrum that created intense internal heating in that organism and killed it? So I would suggest that red light therapy and near infrared therapy, it's more the hyperthermic effect from a pathogen killing perspective. Now, what we talked about last time is that, the red light interacting with cytochrome C oxidase or other chromophores provides electrons that help support the electron transport chain. So there's, the light provides multiple benefits, particularly in the near infrared and red. So it's not just hypothermia and it's not just electrons, it's a combination of two. So, but see, this brings the concept of focal or localized hyperthermia, just like we have focal or localized infection. So why are we treating the whole body when we might be able to reduce the burden and have an effect on just local tissue? And that's where things like HIFU, high intensity ultrasound, can do targeted hypothermia. But I think we can all do targeted hypothermia at home, and I'm starting that process. And I'm once again testing myself in this process. I started it last night, but it suddenly dawned on me, why aren't I doing this? So the temperature which pathogens are at the infected site are actually exposed to is currently unknown. However, it is almost certainly higher than that of the blood entering the infected site, since heat is generated at inflammatory foci, just where the focal infection is. For example, studies assessing the temperature of inflamed arteriosclerotic plaques have found temperatures up to 2 degrees Celsius higher than core temperatures. So that's almost 4 degrees Fahrenheit. So our body is already doing focal or localized hypothermia.
My energy is something I'm going to work on.
So it's not just a fever that provides us with global hyperthermia, but localized hypothermia. So it has been proposed that one source of this heat is from the macrophages and the inflamed plaques. I won't go into this. Neutrophils can create bursts that lead to heat. I got references to all this stuff. I'm going to be writing this up and get it more formal. Blood, things like interleukin-2 can rapidly generate heat. High temperatures can be generated very locally. It was revealed in the mitochondrial temperatures were found to be as high as 122 degrees Fahrenheit. So we can have extraordinarily high local temperatures with presumably minor or no collateral damage. Okay. And then just here's a bunch of things on reducing fever. Although fever and sickness symptom behaviors are regulated in different regions of the brain, both are inhibited by these antipyretic drugs, particularly ibuprofen, stronger than acetaminophen. So for pain, acetaminophen rather than ibuprofen. We don't want to downregulate this is an interesting thing. You don't want to downregulate focal or local hyperthermia. You may not have a fever, but you have a localized fever. And these drugs will probably reduce that, which is exactly what you don't want to do. So I must have my sections a little topsy-turvy, but you know, I have a whole section on all the studies that show that taking ibuprofen is deleterious to recovery from various infectious and inflammatory conditions. But now we'll get into, so this work here is how does fever impact immune cells? His team showed how immune cells travel from the blood vessel to the site of infection. A fever gives the cells a superpower that speeds up the trip, his team found. So I already mentioned this. So I say, how does this work? Increased temperature reduces viscosity. And so here's a Science Direct paper that just basically says that you increase the temperature of a fluid, you increase its viscosity. So think about a local elevated temperature effect. You're going to get much better blood flow in that area. So I say, I might change my opinion on this, but hyperthermia treatment, artificial hyperthermia treatment, may not be as good as fever because cytokines are not produced concomitantly, at least not at the same level as with a fever. They're definitely still produced. So there are papers out there that kind of go both ways on this, but I think the bottom line is temperature creates a signal, whether it's induced by fever or induced artificially by elevating the temperature, and that cascade then leads to the production of these cytokines. So it's probably difficult to not have cytokines produced when we induce the fever, say with near infrared light, for example, going out in the sunshine, exercising. All these things can do this. So this is why I'm thanking Dr. Harshfield, because he just got my brain thinking about this when he said, when you breathe in and exhale, particularly when you breathe in, the air temperature normally is less than 98.6, not always obviously, but even if it's not, even if it's higher, even the flow of air will increase evaporation and create localized cooling. So this area is going to be lower in temperature than the rest of your body, potentially. Maybe not my fingers right now, but you know, I'm not worried about the outside of my fingers getting infected. I'm worried about my nose. So many people have some rhinitis. So here's a study where they looked at local nasal hypothermia by inhaling heated water vapor as a home remedy. Inhaled heated vapor treatments are simple saline. They were investigated for inflammatory mediator production. And the conclusion was that this study demonstrates the usefulness of large particle vapor treatment in saline solution irrigation and reducing inflammatory mediators in nasal secretions. So here's the full study, I think. No, this is more. The nasal cavity is the case in point. Airflow through the nose, cooling the environment. This is part of the reason for sinus and other nasal area infections, infectious species in general, for cooler temperatures. Due to the cooling produced by airflow, the temperature of the nasal turbinates. I did translate that, but it's little structures. Varies between 88 and 90 degrees, 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So as much as 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the body, thus allowing for the development of rhinoviruses, the main agents of the common cold. And we'll do a little typo fix there. So turbinates are small structures inside the nose that cleanse and humidify air that passes through the nostrils. So study results. 95 patients with documented rhinitis have been treated with the local hypothermia in a randomized controlled trial. One series of 3 30-minute insufflations of humidified air at 109 degrees Fahrenheit at 2-hour intervals. In the active treatment group, 70% were symptom-free for a bit. So the real data was in 1 week, 75%, and after 1 month, 68% were rhinitis-free. The placebo group was 28 and 17% respectively, and they had a device on them as well. It was pumping air or something else through it. So the placebo group experienced the same device, but with room temperature air. It's important experiments from 1982. Not a lot on this type of stuff in the current literature. Wonder why. That clearly shows that hypothermia alone, without fever, and the associated immune response is safe and effective treatment for allergic rhinitis and by extension other temperature vulnerable pathogens. So hypothermic treatment in the sun, sunlight will increase core body temperature. I think it's really important to understand the mechanism. And Scott, I think you're out there. We were talking about this just 3 hours ago. You know, the air in my room is what, 65, 70 degrees, and air is not very dense. So I'm not getting a lot of heating effect from it. So when you feel warmth from a campfire, that's not by heating the air. If you're out on a cool night and you have a campfire, the air in between you and the campfire is relatively cool. It's the infrared light that's doing all the heating. And the beautiful thing about it is conduction, just the warming of air and then the air warming you, is all superficial, just on the skin. Whereas the infrared light will penetrate as deeply as it can based on the frequency and intensity and warm you from the inside as well as the outside. So it's really important. So sunlight, and now we know, Robert, based on your work, that you can raise your body temperature 3.5 degrees with these halogen lamps. With the infrared light, the most important component of light waves in sunshine, increase the temperature of any substance with which it interacts. That's why you feel a tremendous warming effect from sunlight. The main mechanism is surface and internal heating caused by the infrared light and not from warm air interacting with the skin. So here's a guy that did a good job on fever, Donahue chiropractic. Raising a body temperature, good summary, kills many microorganisms, has an adverse effect on the growth and replication of others. Virus and bacteria actually grow best at temperatures lower than that of the human body. Higher body temperatures decrease blood serum levels of iron, zinc, and copper. Not sure we like that, all of which are needed for bacterial replication. We do like that. That's an interesting statement because we're all talking about copper and zinc as a treatment in SARS. So we got to be cognizant that we can potentially overdo it. Increased temperature causes lysosomal breakdown and auto-destruction of cells, thus preventing viral replication in infected cells. Heat increases white blood cell formation and motility, thus facilitating the immune response. The white blood cells, which carry out the destruction of invaders, get where they are needed faster and do their job more efficiently. Once again, increased blood flow. And then phagocytosis, where we do a better job cleaning out. A study of adults with colds found that aspirin and acetaminophen suppress production of antibodies and increase cold symptoms, with a trend towards longer infectiousness. And a study of children with chickenpox, acetaminophen prolonged itching and the time of scabbing compared to placebo treatment. In test tube studies, aspirin suppressed the ability of human white blood cells to destroy bacteria. So these things may be scrubbing the reactive oxygen species that you're producing. I'm not sure that's the case, but potential mechanism. Another study found that pain relievers, ibuprofen, inhibited white blood cell production of antibodies by 50%. So here's a complicated journal article talking about arguments for fever being beneficial. It's self-limiting and well-controlled. I think that's an important point when anybody wants to conduct hypothermia on themselves, is we don't want to go beyond what our immune system would elicit in terms of a temperature increase. Right now I'm experimenting on my eyes, but I have a little retinal deterioration. So I'm being very careful and titrating up with my halogen light from 18 inches away, and I'm going to progressively get a little closer. My lids are shut, so I'm looking mainly in this case, but the infrared light will penetrate through, but I'm mainly looking for a hyperthermal effect on that little bugger we call Toxoplasma gondii. So with fever, unlike hypothermia, body temperature is well regulated by the hypothalamic set point. So they say do not exceed 106. I think that's a little high. I mean, maybe if I was stage 4 cancer, I would say bring the heat on. But that sounds within this upper range, 104. Fever is not injurious to tissue, according to this research article. About 20% of children seen in the emergency room have temperatures over 104, and they usually make a full recovery. Interesting piece of data, so I like that. So if they say their claim is if there is morbidity and mortalities through the underlying disease, associated fever may well be protective. So here's some other case studies. In meningitis, the presence of fever greater than 40 degrees, once again, that's 104, did not indicate a poor prognosis, but all children presenting with hypothermia died. Study from Japan found that frequent administration of these NSAIDs, antipyretics, children with bacterial disease led to worsening of their illness. Another study of 102 children with salmonella from Finland, there was a significant negative correlation between the degree of fever and duration of excretions of organisms, the lipopolysaccharide, the dead bacteria. Subject with fever greater than 104, 40 degrees Celsius, had the shortest duration of bacterial excretion, whereas those without fever had the longest duration. Fever has therefore a favorable prognostic influence on the length of bacterial excretion, which can be correlated to just the duration of disease. Interesting, you go to PubMed and you do a title-only search on hyperthermia, you get 44,000 articles, 44,000. Judy, has your doctor put you on hypothermia yet? 44,000 articles, they should have at least read one, right? Can it be useful? So most of the articles are related to cancer. And so they talk about it as a type of cancer treatment. Not really excited about any of these things. It applies to several heat application techniques, all of which are not particularly natural. Infrared light would be considered natural. I think if you simulate the Jack Cruz modality and go to the beach in Mexico and hang out there for a long time on the beach, you'll get some nice hypothermia. The types are microwaves, radio waves, and ultrasound. Yeah. Why isn't infrared light in that list for cancer treatment? Because I think they're trying to get targeted light rather than general light. And I think they should be doing both, clearly. And the source will depend. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but these treatments go to very high local temperatures. 48 Celsius, 90 Celsius, it's like 180, 190 degrees. So they say the curative capacities, problems include failure to heat the target without damaging the nearby cells, difficult achieving homogeneous heat dispersion. This is what happens when you use focused, very high temperature. This is not infrared and simulating a fever. They're not simulating a fever. They're simulating something unnaturally hot. So here's one article that actually talks about using infrared. And so among the different modes of whole body hypothermia, energy transfer with infrared radiation seems to have established itself. They're being very conservative. It's a simple procedure. Infrared system differed, different wavelengths, but I say the best way to apply infrared light is full spectrum. UV, visible, full spectrum infrared from sunlight or something similar. So here's a study on the infrared hypothermia. 80 patients treated with advanced stage cancer, 40 male, 40 female, were performed with a whole body hypothermia infrared irradiation. This is the device. The hypothermia was they did oxygen therapy, sugar therapy, and chemo. The core body temperature was measured rectally and through the urine. The objective of the thermal control, so on and so forth. But anyway, they showed that it does have an effect. And I'm testing the effect on myself, but it's very obvious that hypothermia in the fever range is an important modality. So, in my humble opinion, infrared and red light treatment is the best way to apply hypothermia systemically and locally. Infrared and red light provide antioxidants to ensure electrons' energy are provided to the Krebs cycle for healing and energy. So if you apply red light and near infrared light, not only are you getting a thermal effect, but you're also producing electrons to heal tissue that could potentially be damaged by it. Sun's amazing. It provides us with all this stuff. Temperature speeds up reactions of both destruction and repair. And the organisms don't see that I can tell a repair mechanism. Their only mode is replication. Elevation in temperature stimulates production of immunity, cytokines. Elevated temperature are hostile to most pathogens. Our own tissues have repair mechanisms. Pathogens may not, I qualify. Go out into the light and warmth of the glorious sun, you pale and sickly ones, and share with vegetation its life-giving and healing power. There's only 44 chats, so if I go through those at my normal pace, we'll be here till Bastille Day. So in that regard, I appreciate all the comments. I don't know what they are yet. I'm not going to look at them today. So I have a couple consults I have to run to. But Dr. Harshfield, come and land this plane.
That is interesting how you learn all this information from various little silos. I remember my first family practitioner, Dr. H, we'll call him, was, I guess I was 5 or 6 years old. I had one of those things that didn't go away, so it worried my mom. So she took me to him, and he drew some blood. I was sitting there looking at it. I just love this guy. He was my family doctor the whole time I was a little kid and growing up in high school and all that. He was a serviceman from the wars, World War II. And he's drawing my blood, sitting there talking to me. And I'm kind of looking on the wall, kind of like that picture where the kid's looking at the doctor's credentials on the wall before he gets a shot. His pants are down. I can't remember the name, the Rockwell painting. So I'm sitting there looking at Dr. H, and he's drawing my blood. And he shakes it up in the syringe for a couple of minutes, and it's called sequestration. When you succuss blood, you're breaking the cells down, so you get the fluid out of them. And he said, "Okay, Dave, now bend over," and he jacked that in my glutes. Autologous blood heals wounds, and he learned that in World War II. I bump into him at a spa years later, maybe a couple of years ago, and I'm sitting there, and there's Dr. H, and I go, "Hey, how are you doing? It looks great." And we're talking, and he goes, "Now look, do you have a hot tub?" "Yeah, that's what I'm doing here. I'm trying to get some chemicals and stuff." Where he goes, "Look, you got to break a sweat 3 times a day." He said, "That's important for you to get your temperature up 3 times a day." And here is a family practitioner that knows this stuff. My grandmother, when we were kids and had a fever, they'd put a blanket on us to make us hotter, not give us aspirin. A lot of this stuff we know, but we don't know why we know it. And to your point, Thomas, when we talk about our sinuses, that's the coolest place, coolest place. If you're a fungus, it's real cool. It's the coolest place in the body, so that when microbes want to live somewhere, this is where they live. And that's why it's a good idea. You talked about steam and whatnot. I think it's more fun. And that's what I do. I drink tea and coffee during the day. My diet is a fast 5 arrangement where I fast most of the days, and 5 hours a day I'll eat from 2 to 7 o'clock. When I'm not eating, I'm drinking coffee or tea to keep my nose warm to fight microbes. And we know that nasal administration of drugs from doing insulin several years ago, anything that goes in your nose is going to be in your brain in about 20 minutes. So this is a really simple way to do something, and trying to understand it. And Dr. Lewis just put it in excellent perspective, how important heat is to a point. And one of the things that we studied were breast cancer back when I ran the breast center at the med school. And patients will have a cyclical change in the temperature of the breast. A normal breast will be colder at night, warmer during the day. And when they have cancer, it stays hot all the time. So now you're going, cancer, okay, if it stays hot, it increases blood flow. That's kind of good for cancer, but it's really your immune system's response to an invader. So this heat and so forth, the dissipation. And then I'll end with this. I used to teach the wrong thing, so I'll tell it to you the right way. The blood coming from the heart up into the carotid arteries going into the brain has to go through a little sinus, a sinus right in here, the pterygoid sinus. And we were taught that blood's hot coming out of your heart. So it's got to cool off before it gets in your brain. And this cavernous sinus is surrounded by venous blood coming out of the brain to get back to the jugulars and the heart. So we taught that this hot blood went through this cool venous blood to chill out before it got to the brain. Totally incorrect. The blood coming out of the brain is on fire. Of course it is. The venous blood coming out of the brain is really hot. So the carotid arterial blood goes through this warm blood to get into the brain. So temperature and thermal regulation is important. A lot of different doctors understand a lot of different aspects of it. What Dr. Lewis did today, all this in perspective, make sense. And so now we've landed the plane on an aircraft carrier.
Bingo. And so just a comment I put in the note is that for the first time, I started really just like shining the light right on my face. And I'm going to do it cautiously because I don't want to mess up my eyes, but and I'm not going to do it long duration because I'm trying to do things rather superficially. But any of you ladies, you know what, and us guys too, because look at these. The same light therapy that killed the Demodex on the eyelids also smooth wrinkles. So my theory for years has been there are little organisms under the skin, and maybe hypothermia could be a broader treatment for those kinds of things. And so I don't like to, really wasn't intending to end on an aesthetic note. I always like to end on a more medical intervention note, but it cycles back, David. Thank you for the overview, Dr. Harshfield, but it cycles back to the same thing. It's the natural processes like the sunlight that we're not getting that have the most benefits. So, you know, I think that, you know, the sauna is probably very good. With the incandescent bulb, I think combining the red and near infrared light together to get both the hyperthermia and the healing at the same time, because you get those electrons from the near infrared light as well. What an amazing combination. And then with Michelle's testimony on healing, that is, you know, it's magnetic fields, but it's really producing this perpendicular electrical field. And the infrared light does that intracellularly in the most magnificent way that the magnetic field may or may not do, because we have very specific chromo light force absorbing substances in our mitochondria that interact with that. And so we have to be mindful that that, you know, in this case, it's not the elevation in temperature that improves our energy and electric field, but it may be the hyperthermia that kills the intracellular pathogens that may be robbing your electrons. So we're getting much more benefit than I initially really put together, David. To your point, it's like we gotta tie it all together. And with that, I'll look at the questions maybe, and we'll try to address some of those. If you come on early, if you want to come back, come on early, like 7:45 Eastern, and I'll go through some of the questions that came about. And I see a number of different folks asking for copies of the book. So you guys can go, if you want a copy of the book, just go to Health Revival, save me some time, healthrevivalpartners.com/books. My website /books. And in the upper right corner is that image of me, and almost upper right corner is that image of me and Carter that I showed. And feel free to download that. And with that, have a good Monday. Take care.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.